Thank you for coming today to our committee room where we're going to announce our 100 by 50. And I wanted to say I'm here with members of the committee, but particularly Congressman Paul Tonko, who chairs our Environment and Climate Change Subcommittee. And we're expecting Bobby Rush, who chairs our Energy Subcommittee. His flight has been delayed from Chicago, but we're still hoping that he'll be here. And then I have my other colleagues here. Nanette Berrigan is here. Don McEachin is here, who's been out. I mean, not that everyone hasn't been, but you've been particularly out front on this issue. And of course, Mike Doyle, who chairs our Communications and Internet Subcommittee. And they'll be available also to answer any questions that you might have. So we are. Oh, did I forget you, Darren?
It's okay.
All right, I was talking to him too much. I forgot Darren Soto, also from Florida, who's here as well. We may be joined by others, but I think that's it. So anyway, I wanted to basically talk briefly about, sort of do this in three ways. You know, first of all, what our committee has already done with regard to climate action. Secondly, why we are doing this today. And then, you know, what exactly we have in mind. And obviously, I think it should be clear that climate change is a top priority for our committee. And so what we've already done in the first 6 months, if you will, of this Congress, where we're in the majority for the first time in a number of years, is first of all, we passed H.R. 9 that basically prevents President Trump from withdrawing from the Paris Agreement on climate change and asks that he and his various agencies put together a plan to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. That passed the House. We also did 5 bills that were reported out of the full committee last week on energy efficiency. They came from either Paul Tonko or Bobby Rush's committee. I'm not going to go into the details about those, but essentially what they deal with is you know, fuel efficiency, weatherization, grants to states so that they can upgrade and do things that address climate change. And dealing with renewables. So those bills will also come to the floor as soon as we come back in September after the August recess. And then most importantly, which all the Democratic members of the committee sponsored, the Lift America Act. And this was basically the infrastructure bill for the items that were within our jurisdiction. Now, you know, unfortunately, because the president walked away from the infrastructure bill, we have not been able to move those on a bipartisan basis, but we do intend in the fall to start, you know, hopefully the president comes back to the table, but even if that doesn't happen, we do intend to move those bills separately through the committee as well as to the floor. And I'm not going to talk about the details of those because what do I announce? What I want to really talk about now is, you know, why now? What is going on now? And then talk about what we have in mind. Now, I can talk from, I think we all know that weather incidents, severe weather incidents are getting worse, whether it's droughts, whether it's wildfires, more severe storms, farmers suffering from the effects of extreme weather. But I can just talk personally, because I almost didn't get here today, because over the weekend at the Jersey Shore, which is part of the region that I represent in New Jersey, we had incredible, you know, high temperatures. In my hometown, at my house, it was up to 103 degrees. And this is with humidity. This isn't like, you know, being in Phoenix, okay? And this was over the weekend. And then last night, because of all the storms, the power went out. So in my district, maybe we have, what, about 700,000 people, and you know, something like 200,000 of them are without power, including my own house. So, you know, my wife and my daughter keep calling me every day, what are you doing about this? I said, I'm having a press conference today on climate change. We don't care. What are you doing to get the power back on? In any case, so it's personal. And it's what, you know, obviously we're hearing from our constituents as well. But it's also the economic cost of climate change. It's not just the inconvenience, it's the economic cost. You know, our economy is going to take a major hit as this weather gets more severe. We're talking about extreme temperatures resulting in $160 billion in lost wages per year by the end of the century. U.S. economy could lose more than 10% of its GDP in the worst case scenario. Sea level rise. My district, a lot of it is, almost all of it's either along the ocean or the Raritan Bay. Flooding, an incredible problem. So, all this, I think, demands leadership at the federal level. I disagree, with the president. Obviously, climate change is real, and there needs to be federal action. We just can't rely on the states and the federal and the local government. And so when I say why today, I think there's basically a consensus within the scientific community, and we're hearing it from the UN panel, we're hearing from the federal panel here at the US, that by 2050, if we don't get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and that's our 100 by 50 slogan, then it's going to be catastrophic. And I think there's a consensus really amongst the scientific community based on what the UN panel has said, based on what the federal report that recently came out, that we have to have net zero emissions by 2050, so 100 by 50. It's an ambitious goal. I don't want to suggest that it isn't. And there's a lot of ways of dealing with it, which we can discuss if you want to hear more about it. But the main thing is we're going to start a process beginning tomorrow when Paul's subcommittee, which I'm going to have him talk about it more, is having a hearing to begin this process. And the idea is that in the fall, we'll have a series of hearings, we'll have a series of meetings with stakeholders, and by the end of the year, we would put together legislation that would seek to move us to 100 by 50. And it would be comprehensive. It'll be, input from all stakeholders. The idea is to achieve a consensus, hopefully with the Republicans as well, if that's possible. Working with other committees as well. We intend to put this together and then try to get a consensus on it once we've packaged the bill. And again, I think we have to lead. That's the most important thing. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to Congressman Tonko, who'll talk more specifically about the process and particularly his subcommittee's role in the process. Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Paul, for, I can't take away from the fact that that basically the idea of this 100 by 50 came from Paul. It was really he that has been working on it the most right now.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, thank you, Chairman Pallone, and certainly Chairman Rush of our Subcommittee on Energy, and all of my colleagues on ENC, including Don behind me, the tall guy, who has made this goal part of his approach to the climate issue. He brings to this committee a lot of expertise in environmental capacity. Bobby, I just mentioned you. Why don't you join us?
Come on up.
Our subcommittee chair, Bobby Rush. Thank you for your leadership. But as we go forward now as a committee, setting a tone, I think, is important. Frank highlighted why we're gathering together today for the press conference, and I would suggest that it's primarily about, yes, the goal, the threshold year of 2050. It's a 100% clean economy that achieves net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And I think that's important to recognize, to know the goal. And it's also about making certain that there's a process. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But I think we need to identify, define that process, and move forward aggressively, because there's no time here to waste. And also, it's about investing the stakeholders, making certain that there's an inclusiveness to the work that we're going to build to get to that goal. Now, people say, well, why a process? Why is that news? Well, we've been working on this for several months, if not years, when I was still ranker on the Subcommittee of Environment that now has me serving as chair on the Subcommittee of Environment and Climate Change. So that nomenclature change tells you where the caucus is on prioritization, that there is an emphasis and a very strong focus, laser sharp, on climate change. So we go forward with that commitment, and throughout those several months when I was ranker, we had met with stakeholders to develop, take their concerns to heart and mind, and develop a framework of principles. We developed that, 9 in number, to serve as an evaluation tool, so to speak, for any solutions brought forth. We say let 1,000 solutions bloom, but let's do this on a science-based, evidence-based manner. Let's make certain that facts matter and that science will guide us. And so as we took in these concerns from the stakeholders, we developed this framework of principles. And so it's been very strategic, committing first to that agenda. Second, developing a good conversation, a strong conversation with the stakeholders, developing those principles, and now the next logical step, is to move forward with the given exercise of a process to make certain that we involve in an economy-wide, all-market solution. Let the market resolve many of these issues. We're going to rely on that market base to do this economy-wide solution. So we bring in stakeholders from the environmental community, from the unionized labor community, from the farming community, from the environmentalist community, from the business and industrial community, the international-sized business that's important to have discussions with, our local partners in state and municipal government, making certain that all of that stakeholder conversation is had. In a sense, it's like serving a meal, inviting your friends to dinner, right? You set the date. We've set the goal of 2050. You then determine your guests. You bring your stakeholders to the table. That table has been set now by the principles that we've established. And now we know the menu, but we have to get the ingredients and get them right to make certain we serve the best meal. And so now we're going to build on that skeletal the kind of solutions that will come from this give and take with the stakeholders. That's the news here, because we're not going to get this done. We can do any kind of whimsical thing, but we have to get this done in a way that includes conversation with stakeholders, their buy-in, and their involvement in the consensus build. So we'll go forward with various efforts with public hearings. In fact, we launched this immediately to show our sense of urgency. Tomorrow we will have our first hearing on the decarbonization pathway. What are those ways to decarbonize across the board in various sectors to get to our goal? So we'll hear from witnesses that will guide us. We'll also have hearings, many in number, but some, to give you an example, one on reducing industrial emissions, one on reducing transportation emissions, one on modernizing our electric grid, one on the economy-wide solutions that would include putting a price on carbon. But we're also going to have those discussions in hearings that focus on workers and community transitioning, making certain that we understand the impact and making our best effort to make that a favorable, doable outcome. Working on situations like equity and environmental justice, where those neighborhoods have experience who have lived through environmental injustice, we need to be there to provide a resolve. For sustainable agriculture and forestry, making certain that land management and land use adds to the decarbonization solution. So it's a rather aggressive approach. Is 2050 ambitious? Absolutely. But I'm reminded, as one who lived through the space race, of the words of President John F. Kennedy, who said, we're going to do this mission to land on the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And that's the DNA of America. The pioneer spirit in us is in our DNA. And we go forward with this chance not only to resolve issues as they relate to the environment and to address environmental injustice, but it's also to embrace opportunity. Whoever does this first will be that nation that will be the kingpin in the international economy. It will be our innovation that will encourage. It will be our job growth that we will encourage. It will be the relief on the economy. Because as our first hearing taught us this year with the subcommittee under my chairmanship, is that the cost of inaction is expensive. Liabilities that are paid for through insurance premium rise, disaster aid that's dug into the federal taxpayer's pocket and the state government pocket. These are issues that are causing us public health consequences. Thank you to the Moms for Clean Air for reminding us of that. So there are all these issues that we bring together in an academic way, science-based, evidence-based, with a process in mind, letting people know that this is inclusive, that your voice is important, that it matters, and that we will build toward this lofty goal, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. We cannot afford another delay. There's been many, many years that have passed us by, 6 to 8 by some calculations, where under Republican majority, the House ignored climate change, the climate crisis. They've ignored that, and because of that, we now have to catch up with time that demands urgency here. So we want to do this. We want to do it by focusing intentionally, by establishing a goal, developing and defining a process. It's the next logical step. After we've developed our framework of principles, we will build now the solutions that are essential that will get us to this goal, and it will be based, again, on science and evidence so that we can go forward and defend what's done. We want it to be bipartisan, bicameral. We need commitment from both parties in both houses to make this happen, and we're going to continue to build our product so that when there is a force in the White House that accepts the concept of climate change, we can move forward aggressively and resolve the people's concerns for climate crisis. But we can't sit there and just twiddle our thumbs. We need to be at work steadfastly, working to build the consensus while we have this time where there are those who will be the counterforce against fighting climate. So thank you, everyone, for your partnership out there. I see many faces who have been leaders in this effort. We thank you for your voice, for your energy, for your passion. And I thank again Chairman Pallone and Chairman Rush and all of my colleagues on Energy and Commerce and in the Democratic Caucus for their support.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to next introduce Bobby Rush. I love the inspiration that comes from John F. Kennedy, but I'm not sure that you wanted to remind everybody that we lived through that era, because we've got Nanette and Darren here who weren't even, I think President Kennedy
They read the history books.
Died before you were even born, probably. But in any case, but Bobby remembers.
No, I don't.
You don't? Okay. Anyway, I mentioned, Bobby, that that we already had moved the energy efficiency package out of your subcommittee and the full committee, and that we've already been working on these things. But so much of this obviously involves the energy subcommittee as well. So as Bobby is the subcommittee chair. Congressman Rush.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I certainly am glad to have made it from the airport in time before this press conference concluded. Flight delays at O'Hare are a way of life for air travelers. I am just so moved by the leadership of Chairman Pallone and the leadership of my friend Paul Tonko as it relates to climate change and all the associated and varied issues that are connected to the effects of climate change and the absolute refusal of the Republicans to take it seriously. And it's a serious matter for all of us, but it's a particularly serious matter for our young children. I have a young grandson, and the other night he was at my house, and we were watching one of the news programs, and they talked about climate change and the effects of climate change, and with some of the more recent studies. And the way he processed that, those were news reports and that characterization of the effects of climate change reminded me of when I was around his age. And I'm going to admit, Frank, that I was around when Kennedy made those, said those words. I have to admit it. But I can remember, as, excuse me, at his age, when there used to be reports about the atomic bomb and how the atomic bomb was going to destroy the world. And the fear of helplessness and hopelessness that permeated my whole being. I thought that the world would end and I wouldn't get a chance to grow into an adult. And so when he looked at me in a very, very serious manner, he's a pretty jocular kid, life-loving kid, but he had a serious look that I haven't witnessed too many times before, because he was really afraid that climate change was going to end the world. And so they just went to my heart, and told me that this is a serious undertaking, and that we have to do all that we must do. And as I look back over the years and know where we are as a nation, I know that climate change presents for us the best that we have always used when confronted with these kinds of issues. And that's our innovative power and skill. And I look forward to working in the Energy and Commerce Committee with these noble goals and objectives. I look forward to it because I know that out of this process, once we recognize the existential realities that and harm, that we are at our best when we face our issues squarely and look them dead in the face and dead in the eye. And in my community, I look at not only the health issues that are caused by the effects of climate change. My community, asthma is a pandemic almost, asthma, and other health-related issues. But also look at the fact that out of this whole process, new industries will emerge, new opportunities for jobs and businesses will be created. And so as we pursue these issues in a steadfast way, our economy, the American economy in the future will certainly depend on the action that we take under Chairman Pallone's leadership and under Mike Tucker's leadership that we take. My community needs opportunities, employment opportunities. We need the industry, we need the jobs that will be created in a so-called green economy. And that's really what kind of moves me, because I know I can see industries located in the on the south side of Chicago. I can see jobs being created. I can see young people applying their skills and their resources and their ingenuity to deal with these issues. So I am up for the fight, be it political or whatever. I'm up for the fight. I want to work with you, continue to work with you. I want to be one. I'm not a wallflower. I've lost a step or two. But I want to be on the hard-charging front line. I am on the hard-charging front line of this issue. But I want to make sure that it includes everybody. The people, the third world countries in Africa and Latin America, in Asia to a great extent, they didn't cause this problem. But they are the ones who are most victimized by this problem. Small farmers in Africa and in Latin America, they're the ones who are feeling the effects of climate change right now. Children are not being fed, crops are not growing, and it's all because of climate change. And so the world is dependent on what we do in the Energy and Commerce Committee. And I know these two fellows, I've seen them perform some impossible tasks before. So I know that this is nothing, as we say on the south side of Chicago, this is nothing but a step for a stepper. And these are two high steppers right here. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. And thank you also for mentioning that, I forgot to mention that one of the first hearings that you had in the Energy Subcommittee was on workforce development and the fact that in new innovative industries like renewables, for example, that we have to do more to try to bring minorities and those who are disadvantaged involved. And there's a great potential for job creation. So, all right, and any of you want to participate for any questions, don't hesitate. Do we have any questions from the media? Go ahead. Well, let me say, oh, you want to say something? Go ahead. Well, I just want to say, I don't want you to get the impression that we're not trying to incorporate, ideas that came from those who support the Green New Deal. As I said, what we're really trying to do here is come up with a united front that's driven by the scientific community and that's consensus, right? So as we move in the fall to having these hearings and trying to develop a piece of legislation, the ideas that come from the Green New Deal and from those who have who've been outspoken on the Green New Deal are things that we certainly want to hear. But the idea is that there would be specific legislation, a comprehensive package, and the 2050 is based on the fact that that's what the scientific community and the UN and the various federal panels will say. That's the date that if we don't go down to the net zero carbon pollution by then we have a catastrophic situation. And you know that a lot of the other countries in the EU, France, Germany, Japan as well, are using this 2050 target. And we just think that that target is more realistic. But, the Green New Deal has 2030. We could develop certain things that have to be certain goals that have to be met by 2030 or 2040 as well as part of this 2050 goal. But Paul, go ahead, you wanted to.
I think any and all ideas are welcome, and certainly, the attention that has been raised to the issue by their efforts is certainly welcome. We also have a select committee under the great leadership of Representative Castor. Again, that's a complementary force. We're looking for any and all of their ideas and solutions. But there's a statutory responsibility here, and we're exercising that role as a committee and subcommittees to make the effort because of, again, the sense of urgency and the fact that we've been on hold for far too many years in this House, and the public is demanding it. Just listen to your public when you go home. I'm encouraged that Republicans on the committee are moving our way. I think that started with our subcommittee hearings this year. Why? I think there are many reasons, but science dictates it, and the general public verbalizes it. You go home and people are saying, it's no longer about the polar bears, and I respect those polar bears and that desire to assist. It's no longer about coastal erosion when I'm living in the heartland. It's about my backyard. And so now the people get it. They say it's time for us to take action. They see it in immense storms. Just this weekend, there were blackouts, brownouts that people were dealing with. They understand the consequences. So any and all suggestions are welcome. But our role statutorily is to put into place the wordsmithing that will develop accuracy within legislation that is science-based and evidence-based. And that's what today's effort is about. Developing, defining a process, sharing it with the public, and now getting the input to go forward. Look, it's a benchmark year. If science dictates that we can beat that, so be it. We're more than welcome to beat that goal. But the IPCC and the science community has said 2050 is that banner year, it's that threshold year. Is that a robust goal? Absolutely. Should we fade because of it? Should we feel defeated by the fact that it's a robust effort? Absolutely not. Again, it's the pioneer spirit of this country that ought to prevail. We can get it done. We need to put our energy behind it and our academics behind it.
I mean, we know that, I want to ask Mike Doyle to say, I mean, we know that we need to take action quickly. I don't have any power right now in my house in New Jersey. I came here, we have no power, and I don't know when it's going to be put back on. So if there's some way to, move up the deadline or have the 2030 and 24 deadlines, but basically we think that 2050 is something we can accomplish, and we'll talk more about goals before then. But Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I remember 8 years ago on this committee when we tried to do cap and trade. And, we need to build public support. Let's understand something. The Senate, as it's configured right now, and the person in the White House don't want to do anything right now. We couldn't even get a vote 8 years ago on a cap and trade bill. But we didn't do a good job going out and educating and getting public support behind it, too. We lost an input, and we lost 61 seats. And for 8 years, nothing's been done to advance the climate change problem. The worst thing that can happen is for allies to fight with each other. That's a sure prescription for failure. There's no one perfect way to get this done. We're going to follow science. That's the one thing I think we can all agree upon. Things like battery storage technologies are going to allow us to take renewables, wind, solar, geothermal, and make them act like base capacity. They're intermittent sources of power, but we have to store this power so we can use it when we need it. That's a technology that's being developed in universities like Carnegie Mellon that I represent. But I also come from Western Pennsylvania. And in Western Pennsylvania, there's a lot of economic anxiety about what this means for people's livelihoods and their jobs. And that's why this has to be done in a comprehensive way. And that's why, like Paul said, we have to engage all the stakeholders in this process. Because if we don't do that, we're going to fail. And the worst thing that can happen is that we have a circular firing squad where those of us who believe climate change is real and want to do something about the problem fight with each other, and then nothing gets done. There's a lot of action that can take place. Think about what we could do. A third of this comes from office buildings. We could start retrofitting office buildings all over this country and let the contracts out locally so that people in those communities get those jobs and that those jobs pay a prevailing wage and start to build this green jobs economy in all places. We're going to build wind turbines and solar factories. Let's build them in areas that have suffered because of this. And let's bring some economic justice there. But please, let's not fight with each other. We all share the same goal, and we're committed to getting there.
I know Darren and Bobby want to speak. But why don't we ask one more question, then you guys can respond to that or whatever. Andrew, who do you want next? Go ahead. You want to stand up? I can't really.
Look, I think today's press conference and announcement is about a process that we're defining. We're about defining a process, not jumping ahead of it. Again, it's input coming from stakeholders, and making certain that we hear all that input. So the news today is defining a process, and we will go through the academics of giving the input to then build the consensus. I think skipping ahead of the process denies the very purpose of today's announcement.
I want somebody who was born after John
1978, for the record, well after John F. Kennedy. You know, I think we all understand the situation. The world is on fire right now, and we have to look at what we're going to do at this crossroads of whether we're going to look at 2030 and 2050 and see a world that is famine-stricken and beyond repair, where new generations don't get the same opportunities as the past, and we could have instability around the globe, or we could do something right here, right now, to actually change things. And that's what we're saying today that we are committed to putting forward comprehensive legislation to get to 100% clean energy by 2050. And I think that ideas like the Green New Deal are an important part of it. That's helping drive this innovation. They have set goals, and this committee has a long history of getting the work done to solve these things. The Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and now a Clean Climate is what we're tasked with fighting for. And I think the key is it has to be done by some consensus. We're going to have bipartisan buy-in in this, whether it's this Congress or the next one. And so, yes, issues and influences like the Green New Deal are an important part of this, as is setting the stage, looking at our scientists and what they've told us to do. So I'm hopeful, and I hope that there's hope across America that the Congress is taking this seriously, and over the next couple of months, the committee whose responsibility is to tackle this challenge is taking it seriously with this announcement today and the hard work that needs to be done to craft a comprehensive solution.
All right, can we just ask one more question and you respond to it? Go ahead, who's next? Well, I mean, the idea is to have these meetings and hearings over the course of the fall and then have a bill prepared by the end of the year at the latest. Doesn't, it could be November, not necessarily December. And what was the second part of it? I mean, part of it is that we need a consensus, right? And we want a united front. And I think it's fair for me to say right now that that doesn't exist. We want this to be something that we can get the entire or most of the Democratic caucus to support, and that even we could get some Republicans to weigh in. And if we introduced a bill now, I couldn't honestly say that that's the case. And do you want to comment on this, or you want the next one?
Well,
Go ahead.
I just want to say that, we're not standing paralyzed in the headlights. We're moving, we're doing certain things now. We had a markup last week that spoke to our basic core value of trying to create a carbon-free environment. We're doing certain things even now. But I really wanted to try to, this committee is uniquely positioned to, notwithstanding others who are sincere and affected and really want to see a good job. But the Energy and Commerce Committee is uniquely positioned to take the lead on this because we are the ones that have one of the two committees that have primary jurisdiction over the national labs. And we talk about science, all right? And we talk about letting science lead us. Well, we have these 17 national labs are potentially the most powerful resource that we may have in terms of really dealing with the science of this issue, all right? And right now the problem is that their attention has been diffused. They have no common mission. And I think that one of the things you'll see out of the work that we're doing is that we can help sharpen the national lab's mission to include bringing forth the latest and most innovative technologies in order to deal with climate change. So that's one of the things that I look forward to engaging this committee and others on this behalf. And that's where the fundamental work gets done, and that's when you move from just theory into real practice, and
Thank you, Bobby. I'm going to have Don take the next question, but we have all kinds of bills before the committee right now, and some of them we've moved, like the efficiency package, or weatherization, or even the Lift America Act that has, was part of the basically the For the People agenda that we ran on last November. But it has to be consensus-driven in order for us to move it.
Frank, if I might, also, this spreads over many committees.
Yeah.
So while we have jurisdiction on some of the solutions here, other committees will get our input as to what we've defined as concerns, transportation and infrastructure. You know, so there are a number of bills that will be produced. It may not be one big omnibus bill. It will be a series of bills. And to Congressman Rush's point, we've already done some of that. So it's not like we're standing still. But the table has been set. You need to bring the stakeholders together because they will help drive not only the consensus, but the advocacy that will bring people to the votes that we need.
Can we get another question? Who? You picked the person. Yes. Why don't you stand up again so we can hear you? Well, look, I don't want to stress the other committees so much. This is something that we're going to develop within Energy and Commerce, and it'll be mostly within our jurisdiction. But as you know, sometimes within our jurisdiction, you have other committees that, have a secondary jurisdiction over it as well. So this is primarily things within our jurisdiction, but it may end up having. But the main thing is consensus-driven and united front. We honestly believe that now, because we're into this session for 6 months, and we've heard from a lot of different people that we can achieve this 2050 goal, and we can develop comprehensive legislation. It might be one bill, it might be, as Paul said, a series of bills, but the idea is that we come to a consensus, and then we try to sell it, right? So in other words, we may give you a bill by Thanksgiving, but we still have to sell it, but it'll be something that we think that we can sell, okay? That's the point. And it'll be a compilation of a lot of the things that have already been introduced and referred to the committee. So that's why I like it when you guys mention the Green New Deal. That's a comprehensive approach. But we also have a lot of people that have introduced legislation in our committee that's much more narrowly focused. So we're taking these bills that we already have, and we're taking input from stakeholders to see what we can actually move in an effective way.
This is work that can't be avoided.
Yeah.
This is work that needs to be done.
I'm not saying we're doing the work of other committees. We're doing the work of our committees, but within our jurisdiction. But as you know, that's pretty comprehensive, and a lot of that does touch on other committees. We're done. Go ahead.
Frank, there were just two other hands if you want to take the two that were up.
You want to respond to this? You want to see? All right, go ahead. We'll take the two more, and then.
Again, you're jumping ahead of the process.
Well, it's okay. He can ask. All right, and then the next one was?
You're talking about science, and science, as I'm sure most of us know in this room, has been clear since the 70s or 80s, really, if you go back and look on climate science research. How is your approach different now?
Okay, and then the third person, and then that'll be it, and we'll try to answer them collectively.
I think any and all well. And, again, we don't want to preempt the process. We want to make certain there's open mind and science that's guiding us. Also, I think in terms of what's changed, you have an economy that's stronger, beginning with President Obama, who addressed the recession way back when this House last visited this issue. The economy has been vastly improved. And if you look at items like renewables, favorably well beyond what was ever anticipated when we last addressed this issue. Something like 18 cents per kilowatt hour down to 3 cents per kilowatt hour for solar. These are things that are good news, but it's still a lofty goal, and it's going to take, it's not going to be easy to, you can't do it by the energy sector, you can't do it by manufacturing, you can't do it by agriculture alone, you can't do it by buildings alone, by
All right, I want to have Don speak, and then I'm going to kind of wrap up, if that's all right.
I just want to also address the question of what has changed. And what has changed, in my view, is the public's view on this issue. Many of us, all of us, as a matter of fact, have been toiling in the vineyards on this issue of climate change and environmental justice. Some of us at the state level, some of us at the federal level, even some of us at the local level. But it is just now that the public is now coming around to understanding the importance, the germination of all the work that we've done over the years is now coming to fruition, and the public has called on to, this is the fierce urgency of now. You can see it in the polling data. There used to be a time when the environment wouldn't even fall into the top 10 concerns of the American public. Now it's right up there in the top 3. And so now that we have the public's attention and the public's awareness, now is the time to move forward with all deliberate speed and get this done.
I think I like that conclusion better than anything that I or you
Frank,
would say.
one other thing before you close us.
Yeah.
Bring us to a close. Business leadership, utility leadership in many sectors is demanding this. There's a lot of certainty. They know this is real, and they want to respond. So it's time to develop the legislative package.
All right, I think that Don wrapped it up better than me. So I'm going to leave it at that and thank all of you for participating and coming here today. I see we have a lot of younger people that are in the audience with their shirts on from various organizations. We really appreciate that because, you know, you're our future. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good statement, man.
Add some hot sauce.
I can tell you were trying to.
I never thought that I'd
I
be
can tell you.
Aaron.
Thanks, Chairman.
How old are you?
41.
Chairman Glenn, Randy Shasta, reporting with EOS at the American Geophysical Union.
Hey, how are you?
Same here, a couple quick questions. A lot of this plan seems to depend on the 2020 elections, things going your way.
Well, I think that the point is that